Greetings, people. Why am I sucking a plushie? Because I felt like it! Anyways, think of something. Welcome to part 2 of Monty Mayer's Battle of the Eastren Solomons, told from the American's point of view. So, it is time to continue our lesson, shall we? After all, how do we ever learn? And hopefully there won't be a part 3 to this. But knowing me and my knowledge and or lack of thereof, I'll be pausing a lot. Now, as I get my legs on my footrest, because I need to get comfortable too. Get in a comfortable spot on this increasingly uncomfortable chair. I might just get a sofa at this point. Let us begin in 3, 2, 1. Hi. Blink.
The morning of the 24th was expected to be a rather quiet one for Admiral Fletcher. In his mind, the only target that might appear this day would probably be that elusive convoy that had avoided his strike the day before. If discovered again, he vowed to destroy it this time.
It wasn't.
The Enterprise was scheduled to be the duty carrier, providing the air searches and combat air patrol, while Saratoga would be the strike carrier, tasked with destroying the enemy if it appeared again. Sarah's air group, furloughed on Guadalcanal, was expected to be back at 10:30. Now, I have to prepare the audience for the mayhem that is about to come. And for this...
Mayhem? That's about to come? Oh, please, sir, don't say it ain't so. I mean, seriously, it's the Battle of Eastren Solomons. It's going to be a battle. And war is always chaotic, so now you got my attention soaked. Show me this chaos!
We need to know the limits of aerial reconnaissance in 1942. Discovering the enemy via search planes was far from easy and accurate. Many factors hindered its effectiveness. First, there was human error. Messages could be delayed when sent up the chain of command. Also, it was very common for pilots to misidentify the ships they saw or accidentally report its position off by some miles. Second, the particular atmospheric conditions in the South Pacific tended to garble and block messages. So, despite one's best efforts, you could send an accurate report just to have it come out garbled at the other end. With that in mind, let's look at the reconnaissance plan for that day. In addition to Fletcher's own morning search, 6 PBYs from Nadinia were also sent to cover the waters north of Task Force 61. None of the 20 search planes Fletcher sent found the enemy, but every single PBY ran into Japanese forces. Starting at 1000 hours, a series, nay, a flood of reports began to arrive to Fletcher, all of which ended up influencing the course of events. Let's begin. At 10:03, a PBY discovers 2 light cruisers and a destroyer 300 miles away from Fletcher's position. At the same time, a B-17 from Espiritu Santo found an enemy cruiser 125 miles from Henderson Field. At 10:16, the easternmost PBY spotted 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers 330 miles off Task Force 61. At 10:30, the same pilot reported being attacked by 3 aircraft, later reported as Zeros. At just about the same time, another Catalina reports being attacked by Zero-type fighters and that he was returning to base. At 10:50, yet another PBY claimed it was being attacked by unspecified enemy aircraft. This occurred 330 miles north of Task Force 61. Although no carriers had been reported, these last few messages of Zero-type aircraft being encountered were worrisome for Fletcher. They were the first evidence that enemy carriers might be in the vicinity. While Fletcher was monitoring these early reports, Saratoga's air group finally arrived from Guadalcanal. This was welcome news, since all these sightings meant that a busy day was ahead of them. But no sooner had they landed that the most startling message came at 11:16. But not from any of the search planes, but from Enterprise's commander, Rear Admiral Kincaid. A carrier had been spotted. At 0935, a PBY ran across a carrier, 2 cruisers, and a destroyer. The pilot sent his report, which the Enterprise received, but unfortunately, the Saratoga didn't. Kincaid wisely rebrought.
Oh, yeah, that's gonna sting.
Casted the sighting to Fletcher by radio, but again, Saratoga failed to receive it. It was only now that Kincaid, suspicious of the inactivity of his commander, asked him to confirm the carrier sighting. Fletcher quickly acknowledged and thanked Kincaid for this important update.
Yeah.
So wow, barely into the battle and already communication failures are obstructing the commander from reacting appropriately. The most crucial...
One moment, I'm gonna see what that reverts to civilian time. Hi. So, 0905 2. Terry time to civilian time converter. Let's see if this is even a thing. Oh. How many of you are writing the comments right now going, it's tribal, it's this, it's this. You didn't have to Google it. Okay, so original message was sent at 9:35, but Fletcher received it 2 hours later, practically, at 11:16 a.m. Gotcha. Oh, I hate military time.
Crucial sighting had been delivered successfully, but it was over an hour and a half old.
Hour and a half, my bad.
In a similar manner, at 11:17, another delayed message was received by Fletcher. A light cruiser and 4 unidentified ships had been found at 0905. Therefore, at around 11:30, this is what Vice Admiral Fletcher sees. A nightmare.
Yeah! Yeah! Can't my phone? Really? What? What's so... What is so important? Scam. Scam text messages, everybody. Put on my bed. Alright. I need a chair that is comfortable from my ass to sit in. Anyways, continue, please. But, oh, wait, hang on. Yeah, it's a nightmare. You put your third carrier to get refueled, thinking the enemy's gonna be at least another day away. Only to find out that, oh shit, they got a problem. They're here!
His hope of having an uneventful day has been shattered. Clearly, the much-anticipated counteroffensive was now underway with at least one carrier confirmed. And surely, 2 more carriers were lurking nearby. There had to be. There was no way Japan was conducting an operation this big without all 3. The problem was the remaining 2 had yet to be found. It would be no exaggeration to say that the situation looked critical. Battle had commenced, days before being expected, and with the Wasp unable to participate. It's at this moment that Fletcher must have begun to regret his decision of letting the Wasp refuel. His flawed intelligence had put him in such a terrible position.
Yeah, and again, as stated in my previous video, Fletcher, in his last 2 battles that he's respected for, the Battle of Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway, he had the ability to read over the shoulders of say Admiral Yamamoto. He was cheating in that respect, where he had great intelligence. It was just when the Japanese changed their code books, their codes, and even the code names, that the American intelligence failed. So he no longer had that. He no longer had that advantage. And so while it was a very, 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 very tough decision for him.
So some analysis could be made at this point. The surface units sighted pose no immediate threat to Fletcher's carriers, so they can be disregarded. They're not worth hitting. It's these sightings that warrant our attention. Clearly, the sighting of a carrier with an additional report that Zeros were active meant that this was definitely a carrier. Worse yet, it was at best only within extreme striking range. On the eastern sector, all there were these 2 reports of aircraft, but no definite sightings on carriers. Now, you just can't conclude that aircraft encountered means an enemy carrier is nearby. There is always the possibility that pilots had gotten a bit jumpy and misidentified the aircraft.
Yeah.
They could be carrier-based fighters, or they could be float planes from cruisers. So until carriers were confirmed, Fletcher decides to put these sightings on hold as suspicious, but not urgent. So, a dilemma had arrived for Admiral Fletcher. Kincaid tells Fletcher that an airstrike is possible against the 1 carrier that has been found. The target has probably closed the distance and should be 245 miles away by now, just within striking range. Should Fletcher launch at the only confirmed carrier sighting he has now, or hold back and wait until he finds the remaining 2 carriers? In carrier warfare, launching your strike first is advantageous. If he is lucky, he can destroy the carrier with its planes still on board. But then again, you don't want to throw your main punch at just 1 carrier. It would be ideal if you could find all 3, so you could then plan your attack more carefully. Although waiting could be dangerous, given that no enemy search planes had been detected on radar so far, it looked like his position hasn't been revealed to the enemy, and it would be safe to wait. So, if you were Fletcher at this moment, what would you do?
Ooh, that's tough. I'll be honest. That is a very, very, very tough decision to make. Because on one hand, yes, you can send your entire fleet forces to go to sink that 1 carrier, and you hope that it's the one of the bigger carriers, because then you can take off a good chunk of their planes right off the board right then and there. That way, those 2 carriers, it'll be an even fight between the 2 carrier forces. But if it's a light carrier, it's not going to do as much, but it'll still, at the very least, put the 2 opposing sides at equal footing. It'll just be that one of the larger carriers, like a Suikaku or Shukaku, would be a better choice overall. So what I would do, I would attack. Because then I would at the very least even the playing field a lot, especially with the forces on Guadalcanal. But we'll see what's going to happen next.
Well, if you decided not to have a trigger finger and instead hold back your airstrike for future use, then you followed in Fletcher's exact footsteps. Fletcher made the decision to wait for further developments. He would close the distance with the only known carrier thus far and hold back the strike group in the hopes the 2 remaining carriers would be found.
Damn. I mean, I'm aggressive in my tactics. But, again, I can see why he did it, but I would have struck that carrier out. And at the very least, level the playing field.
Found. The reluctance can be explained. The situation was looking eerily similar to what he faced at Coral Sea. In that battle, he had launched his entire strike against what he believed was the main enemy force, only to discover that he had struck a light carrier while his main prey got off scot-free. The next day, that same pair fatally damaged his carrier. He did not want that to happen again. So, convinced that additional carriers were nearby, Fletcher ordered a second air search to find them. Meanwhile, the Saratoga had its air group ready, 50 aircraft on the deck, fueled and armed, ready to attack any further carriers that would turn up. Meanwhile, Fletcher's tactical situation just kept getting grimmer. At 11:50, radar detected a snooper in the skies, 30 miles away. The Maverick...
And with that, your element surprise is now gone.
This flying boat was shot down by fighters at 12:13. Fortunately, no radio transmissions from the plane were detected. This, and given the fact of how far away it had been shot down, Fletcher felt his position had not been revealed. At 12:42, an updated sighting report comes in of some surface units heading north. But most importantly, no carrier is reported among them. 10 minutes later, another enemy search aircraft appears on radar. A low Flying Betty gets intercepted and destroyed, but this time only 7 miles from Saratoga. Again, just like the previous search aircraft, no reported transmission was detected. But as you can imagine, Fletcher didn't believe his luck could be that good. He would later say, "The presence of these planes clearly indicated that our position must be known to the enemy."
Yeah.
Then, at 13:20, a significant development occurs. Saratoga's radar detects an airstrike that was already airborne. But fortunately for Fletcher, the air group appeared to be heading towards Cactus and not him. However, for Fletcher, this was the last straw. He had waited as long as he dared. Many reasons were now compelling him to launch. First, he firmly believed his position had been revealed to the enemy. This strike could divert at any time and head towards him instead, or another strike could come from the 2 undiscovered carriers. Second, his vulnerability. If he kept waiting, he would risk getting attacked with aircraft on board, which, as we saw at Midway, would be disaster.
Yeah, and say for Enterprise, who has armor protecting its bombs and torpedoes and its torpedo bays, or storage bays, where all those ordnance is stored. But let's face it, you'd be a madman if you didn't decide to protect those from bombs and from dive bombers, which will pay dividends for Enterprise survival. In regards to torpedo attacks and the kamikaze, but Saratoga, I don't think Saratoga had that same idea. I think it was only Yorktowns and later generation aircraft carriers that had that. So Saratoga definitely didn't have that. Plus, as we saw at Midway, let's face it, if you're gonna have aircraft, air fuel, bombs, torpedoes, all of it being just laid out in your hangar decks and planes on the deck, it is one big massive ticking time bomb, especially if you get hit with a torpedo or a bomb. So the clocks are ticking.
And third, time was a factor. It was already well into the afternoon. Time was running out if he wanted to strike and return before dark. So again, the question was posed. Should Fletcher attack this sole carrier or continue to press his luck and wait for the remaining two to appear? Keeping in mind the high possibility that his position has been revealed and an enemy airstrike could come at any time. Again, I would ask you to consider the options this time around. What would you do?
Attack. No, seriously, attack the carrier. Because at the very least, and here's the massive issue. You know, an airstrike has already been launched towards Guadalcanal. Yes, that airstrike can be diverted to attack you at any time. But if you sink that carrier, it means that some of those planes will not have anywhere to land. Because carriers have very limited space. We saw this in Midway, where Yorktown couldn't recover all her aircraft, so her air wings went to Hornet and Enterprise, respectively. Now, yes, most of Yorktown's air wing was gone, mainly the torpedo bombers, so it was okay. You had two other carriers to carry most of those aircraft, but it still means you still got premium space, and Enterprise and Hornet still had to drop off badly non-repairable aircraft overboard to make space, because you need enough space to even launch your aircraft effectively. So if you sink that carrier, it means that those two remaining carriers, remember who they are going to have a problem of an overcrowded flight deck. Now, this could be mitigated with the fact that half the air group will go to both carriers, but it's depending on which carriers they are. Since in this video, we don't know which these carriers are. We know that carrier's gonna be the Ryujo. I just know that. But at the sense of the scenario, I don't know what that carrier is. It could be the Ryujo, it could be the Suikaku or Shukaku class. If it was a Shukaku, I would strike. If it was a Shukaku or Suikaku, we know it ain't, but in that scenario, that means Shukaku or Suikaku, depending on which one you damage or destroy, her air group will be forced to land on her sister ship and Ryujo. And Ryujo definitely does not have to have the deck space and large enough that can accommodate her aircraft. It's not going to happen. Plus, if the Japanese were smart, they'll leave half their air wings on board in case there were a Japanese American carrier force nearby, so they can launch a strike force at them too. So it makes sense.
Well, Fletcher felt he had no other choice. Having failed to discover any other carriers, he decided to send this powerful air group towards the lone carrier northwest of him. At 1340, he sent aloft 30 dive bombers and 8 torpedo bombers. As before, no escorts were given because of the distance. Fletcher, still retaining hope that the remaining 2 carriers would appear, ordered his carriers to form a small reserve from whatever planes they could find in such an event. While Sarah was launching her air group, a new bogey appeared on Enterprise's radar. Fighters were sent, and the float plane was destroyed. Again, weirdly enough, no transmission was detected from the aircraft. As Sarah's air group was en route, Fletcher got an update on the lone carrier that surely disappointed him. The carrier was believed to be the light carrier Ryujo. Great. His main striking force was heading for a secondary target while his main prey remained.
I mean, yes, secondary target, but you're still scorching off a flat top, and still getting rid of most of Japanese planes to level the playing field a bit. After all, you only have Probably 112 aircraft, if I remember correctly.
Remained at large and undiscovered. Vigilance was an absolute must at this moment. At 1440, reports came in from Cactus. It had been attacked.
Okay, 1430, so 24 hour. 12, 13, 2:30.
At 1415, 4 fighters on combat air patrol spotted an enemy formation to the north. This air group belonged to the Rujo. It consisted of 6 K bombers and 15 Zeros. No doubt, this was the same airstrike that Fletcher had earlier detected on radar, and as suspected, Henderson had been its target all along. The 4 Wildcats rushed in to engage the formation. The alarm was raised, and 12 additional fighters scrambled to the sky. Despite this, the bombers reached Henderson Field successfully and released their bombs at 1430. They left an accurate cluster of craters below, but it caused no real damage. Following right behind them were 9 fighters who strafed the runway. On their way out, the air group was set upon by fighters, and it suffered some considerable losses. Rujo's air group ended up losing 4 Kates and 3 Zeros. In return, Cactus lost 3 fighters.
That's not a bad trade-off for aircraft. And honestly, at this point in time, the bombers are a lot more pressing threat because the Kates can nail a strike carrier. So if they lost, so that it's a good thing.
Fighters. Given the losses of the air group and the negligible damage to the airfield, the air raid can be seen as a failure.
Yeah.
The Marine pilots landed back at Henderson and rejoiced enthusiastically in what was their first major aerial victory against the Japanese. As the Marines successfully defended themselves against the air raid, the Enterprise afternoon search continued reporting a further series of contacts. Most were just amplifying reports of that light carrier that Sarah's air group was currently heading towards. But the most ominous transmission came at 1525. A garbled transmission was heard, and all that was received was that a pilot had unsuccessfully attacked 2 CVs with decks full. And that was it! No location, no course, no speed, nothing. Somewhere in this immense sector, 2 carriers had been sighted, but as to where it was anybody's guess. As can be seen, the day was truly turning out to be one of frustration and disappointment. Fletcher had kept a small reserve strike on board the Enterprise and Saratoga in the event these 2 elusive carriers appeared. And they finally had, but with no location, he couldn't do anything about it. Realizing the danger if the reserve kept waiting on the flight deck, he deliberated on what to do. Perhaps he should send them towards the Rujo sighting as well. He could help neutralize the target there. But he soon received reports it wouldn't be necessary.
Fun fact, Ryushu was bombed before. Yeah, see, Ryushu was being built in Tokyo when, over the horizon in Tokyo, a 2-engine aircraft appeared over the horizon. It wasn't a Betty. It was an American B-24. No, not B-25. It was from the Doolittle raid, and one of these bombers were preparing to hit their target when they noticed Ryujo in the dockyard. And seeing the opportunity there, they changed targets, went to a different route, and dropped their bombs on her. Now, it didn't sink her because she was effectively in a dockyard. She could easily be rebuilt, but it did delay her a lot. Did delay her departure for months. So this is just thing. Also, took her to see 1200, 1300, 1400, 1500, 5 o'clock. 5 p.m.
At 1550, Felt's air group appeared over the much-anticipated enemy carrier, and indeed, it was the Rougeau, a light carrier just under 11,000 tons. It was currently waiting to recover its air group that had just attacked Cactus. Although 7 fighters were providing air cover, none had vectored out to intercept the Americans. Felt split his force into 2 groups, with the larger one going for the carrier and the smaller one against the cruiser. However, the nimble and quick Rougeau turned to starboard, and her evasive maneuvers caused all the dive bombers aiming for her to miss. Felt and the remaining smaller group saw this and quickly diverted. Together, they were able to land at least 3 devastating hits on the carrier. Torpedo bombers followed up and managed to land a hit on her starboard side.
That is impressive. American torpedoes at that point in time were standlessly and American torpedoes just didn't work. Why? Because the Bureau of Ordnance designed the torpedoes, and the torpedoes have a 50-50 success rate because they only launched 2. Because they only had 2 torpedo trials. That was for 1 live fire test. That was it. So 2 torpedoes fired for 1 live fire test. 1 missed, 1 hit. Meaning that it sucked. It really fucking sucked. And even worse, that it's with the magnetic detonators that made the torpedoes detonate prematurely. So, and the contact explorer mechanisms didn't work. It wasn't until I think 1943 and 1944 is when they finally fixed all the damn problems. But by then, lots of American lives were lost due to defective torpedoes. And I think it was the most ridiculous and scandalous thing ever to happen in the American Navy to this day. You don't ever give a soldier, Navy, a seaman, submariner, aircraft pilot defective equipment, especially in a wartime scenario. Because their lives are on the line, and while you're sitting there in your cushy little desk chair, never gonna see your weapon being used. It sucks. Anyways, continue.
The Rougeau was finished. Despite the 7 fighters on combat air patrol, not a single aircraft from Felt's air group was lost. Equally telling, not a single Zero fighter was lost, thus suggesting a lack of aggressiveness on their behalf. The Americans disappeared over the horizon and saw with delight the Rougeau on fire and pouring out smoke. Rougeau's strike group soon returned, only to discover they had nowhere to land. All the planes had to ditch, but their air crews were rescued.
And that's the point of being attacking a carrier, because if they don't have anywhere to land, there goes those planes. It'll take more resources for Japan to cough up to replace those losses.
Crewmen from the Rougeau were evacuated, as it was clear she would eventually sink. The carrier slipped beneath the waves at 2000 hours. She lost 120 men from this attack and practically all of the aircraft she had started the day with.
Yeah.
Fletcher heard about Saratoga's air group pounding an enemy carrier. It was encouraging news because at least he had gotten one. While he pondered over what to do with his reserve, news abruptly came that he no longer had the option of waiting. Large bogies were detected on radar, 88 miles out and closing. Fletcher's worst fears had finally come true. He was about to absorb an enemy airstrike from an unlocated force, and with his own airstrike having already been committed. We will now lift the fog of war for our viewers. 2 massive airstrikes are coming towards the Americans. The elusive Japanese carriers were actually just north of Fletcher and had remained undetected this entire time. Furthermore, they had won the game. It was they who had located the enemy first, and it was they who were about to strike first. A moment of reckoning was about to come for Fletcher. All he could do was prepare to repel these airstrikes as best he could.
Yep. And thus we're about to see Enterprise receive their first massive hits in the war. 5:40 p.m.
Lieutenant Commander Oscar Pedersen, Task Force 61's Air Operations Officer, summed up the current situation perfectly. To say the least, we were in a bad predicament. All of our attack planes were committed on missions, with the main enemy force still unlocated and his planes coming in to attack us. The best we could do was to get ready for an air attack and hope for the best. That airstrike was now 88 miles away to the northwest and closing. It was 27 dive bombers with 10 Zeros as escorts, all under the command of Lieutenant Commander Secchi. Fletcher turned into the wind and began launching all his available fighters, eventually reaching a strong combat air patrol of 53 Wildcats. The reserve strike group on the Enterprise and Saratoga were ordered to launch immediately and head towards the Rujo contact. Sure, she was already destroyed, but maybe the pilots could find some other worthy targets nearby. Within 20 minutes, both flight decks were clear of aircraft and the carriers took fire preventive measures as they anxiously waited for the arrival of the enemy. Radar showed the enemy contact now only 44 miles away, so the fighter director officer ordered 11 Wildcats along with 16 in support to the northwest to intercept the airstrike. However, two major issues would hinder their effectiveness. The first was altitude. Radar could accurately detect an incoming strike and its course, but what it could not estimate was its altitude. That relied on some guesswork on part of the fighter director officers, and they unfortunately calculated the strike at 12,000 feet, when in reality, it was actually at 16,000 feet.
Yeah, that's gonna suck.
The second was poor radio discipline. All the fighters shared the same frequency. Keep in mind that only one transmission could be made at a time. When one pilot talked on the radio, no one else could. As you can imagine, for the fighter director, having to direct 53 pilots on one frequency during a battle would become a near impossible task. With that said, the distant interception was a mess. Secchi had spotted Task Force 61 earlier at 1620 and had turned abruptly to the east. He did this because he wanted to attack the American carriers from the north. This unexpected change of course, in addition to the interception altitude being too low, caused both fighter groups to practically miss Secchi's formation as it simply flew over them. Further hindering interception was the poor radio discipline American pilots would display, making unnecessary transmissions such as, "Tally-ho! They're dive bombers! Look at that one go down! Bill, where are you?" These transmissions blocked the fighter circuit and the fighter director officer was unable to grasp the situation and vector out his fighters effectively. Only 1 Zero was destroyed while Secchi's bomber formation pushed on through. Therefore, at 1638, the Japanese dive bombers had successfully penetrated the outer combat air patrol screen and had made it to their targets without a scratch. Secchi split the formation into two groups. He would personally lead 18 dive bombers towards the Enterprise, while the remaining 9 went for the Saratoga. Fierce anti-aircraft fire greeted Secchi and his men as they reached their dive points over the Enterprise. At 1641, Enterprise's ordeal begins. The first couple of valves missed, but a hit was scored near the number 3 elevator, going through 3 decks
Yeah.
before exploding. The second hit landed near the aft elevator as well, igniting serious fires. And finally, a 10-foot hole was blown in the center of the flight deck. Intense anti-aircraft fire forced the last 3 planes to attack the battleship North Carolina, but they scored no hits.
Fun fact, when the North Carolina opened up with their anti-air firepower, at this point in time, battleships were only just now entering the service. They were just now entering the fleets. So they never fired their guns in anger yet. But when they did, it shocked everybody from the sheer amount of firepower to the point where ships were asking them where they hit because it looked like they were on fire.
Meanwhile, on the other side, the remaining 9 dive bombers had flown towards the Saratoga. However, this division ran into fierce opposition from fighters, so they diverted for the Enterprise instead. On their way there, 2 planes, including the flight leader, were destroyed, causing the air group to split into 2 sections. 4 Vals dived on the battleship North Carolina, but all missed. The remaining 3 aircraft went for the wounded Enterprise, but fortunately for her, all missed as well. The survivors of the Japanese airstrike now turned north to head back home, but that's when their real trouble began. Vengeful wildcats set upon them and caused additional losses to the air group. All told, when the survivors returned home, they discovered they had lost 19 dive bombers and 6 Zeros.
Ouch! Yeah, that'll do it.
That was an atrocious 68% of their air group, a heavy price to pay. But for their effort, they had heavily damaged the Enterprise. For the Americans, only 5 Wildcats had been lost during this dramatic engagement. The Enterprise was on fire, but thanks to her superb damage control parties, the fires were quickly contained.
Yeah.
The hose on her flight deck were patched up, and within an hour, flight deck operations had resumed. Meanwhile, on the Saratoga, Fletcher was relieved they had survived the main blow and had made it out more or less intact. But this short period of safety did not last long, because radar showed a new contact only 50 miles away at 1651. This was a follow-up airstrike the Japanese had sent. It was composed of 27 dive bombers and 9 Zeros, under the command of Lieutenant Takahashi. And, to make things worse, as an indirect result of the bomb hits, Enterprise's steering engine shorted out and her rudder jammed to starboard. She was now helplessly stuck, steaming in circles at 10 knots. Fletcher nervously awaited on what was no doubt about to be the coup de grace for the Big E. The airstrike would inevitably target the wounded Enterprise, who
If only. I'd like to point this out. The only thing that took Japanese Enterprise out of the war wasn't the Japanese Navy. It was the Japanese Army with a kamikaze strike. The Japanese Navy couldn't get rid of the Enterprise.
given her situation, was practically a sitting duck. Nervous radar operators on the Enterprise tracked the incoming strike. But bizarrely, it flew an arc around Task Force 61 and ended up south of the carriers. Then, the contact turned west, and at 1827, it disappeared off-screen to the northwest. It was never seen again. For reasons unbeknownst at that time, the second Japanese airstrike failed to appear over Task Force 61. Wow. Obviously, something had gone terribly wrong for the Japanese. And with that great stroke of luck, the Enterprise was spared her killing blow.
Lucky, everybody! America's finest ship of World War II.
Enterprise regained steering control at 1853, and together with the Saratoga, began heading southeast to recover their remaining aircraft. Now we can discuss what happened to that reserve strike of 26 planes that had taken off right before the enemy attacked. Well, there was no rendezvous of the two carrier groups as hoped. Sarah's air group went north and ran into Kondo's advance force. They scored 2 damaging near misses on the seaplane tender Cheetos. The Enterprise's group themselves split into 2 groups and proceeded separately. The dive bombers headed west, found nothing, and landed on Guadalcanal. And the torpedo bombers also failed to find any targets, but returned to the carriers. The last plane airborne landed amazingly at 2303. So with that, in a somewhat anticlimactic finale, the carrier clash at the Battle of Eastren Solomons was over. That evening, upon further re-evaluation from all the contacts, it was discovered that a powerful surface force was dashing towards Task Force 61. If Fletcher reversed course, he could engage in a night battle with his own forces. But Fletcher deemed it unwise. Japanese surface forces were superior in number, and as mentioned earlier, the Japanese had displayed an impressive...
Yeah, and I'm gonna say this right now, the Japanese surface fleet was powerful. The carriers were just part of the carrier faction, but the surface fleet was massive. Very, very, very massive. And this is not even counting the Yamato, the Yamato or Musashi. Their main forces were a lot more stronger at that point in time compared to the Americans. Because again, it'll be probably not to I think 1923 when the Iowas would make their appearance. So there we go.
...ability for night battles. On top of that, he was low on fuel, Enterprise was badly damaged, and he knew the enemy retained at least 2 undamaged carriers.
Yeah.
In light of this, Fletcher decided to withdraw, although he knew it would be controversial. It's said that Fletcher slumped in his chair and jokingly said, "Boys, I'm going to get 2 dispatches tonight. One from Admiral Nimitz telling me what a wonderful job we did, and one from King saying, 'Why in hell didn't you use your destroyers and make torpedo attacks?' And by God, they'll both be right." As expected, Fletcher's decision to retire would receive criticism. It was believed he wasn't aggressive enough with his surface forces that night. But even without hindsight, we can see Fletcher had made the right choice there. Comparing the numbers available, any night battle Fletcher had offered to the enemy probably wouldn't have gone favorably for him. In view of this, Fletcher made the right call to call off the battle.
Yeah.
So, Fletcher retired south. The next morning surprisingly revealed that the Kido Butai had also made the decision to withdraw. So ironically, both opponents had mutually called it quits and retired from the area. For both the Kido Butai and Task Force 61, the battle was over. But the operation wasn't. Let's not forget why this battle had been fought over in the first place. It was so the Japanese could land troops on Guadalcanal to retake Henderson Field. And astonishingly, despite the inconclusive carrier engagement, the convoy had carried on with its mission. With no American carriers nearby in support, it was up to the Cactus Air Force to stop the invasion force. The convoy bearing south to Guadalcanal was under the command of Rear Admiral Tanaka. He had been ordered to continue on with his mission, despite the indecisive carrier battle of the 24th. Unbeknownst to him, a radar-equipped PBY sighted his convoy as he trekked south that night. By dawn, the Marines were ready to deal with this threat. 8 Marine and Navy SBDs with 10 escorts took off to find them. The escorts had to break off for lack of fuel, but it didn't matter because when the bombers stumbled across Tanaka's force, they discovered it conveniently had no air cover whatsoever. The 5 Marine bombers dived on Tanaka's light cruiser and struck her bow. The explosion knocked the Admiral unconscious, but he would survive. The 3 Navy bombers dived on the transport Kinyu Maru and set her ablaze. Only now did they realize the foolishness of sending an unprotected convoy towards an enemy airbase. The convoy mission was called off. But the convoy's misery wasn't over. The destroyer Mutsuki was alongside the burning Kinyu Maru, taking on board survivors, when a flight of 3 B-17s appeared. In a rare achievement, the B-17s were remarkably accurate with their high-level bombings. They struck the destroyer and she sank. The transport was subsequently scuttled. By the evening, the convoy had retired north, leaving behind the transport and a destroyer beneath the sea. Therefore, By preventing Japanese reinforcements from reaching Guadalcanal, the valiant Cactus Flyers had transformed an indecisive clash of carriers into an allied strategic...
Well, I want to say indecisive clash. After all, the carriers did... Fletcher did succeed in sinking a carrier. Taking one away from the Japanese. Problem was, Japan just launched one against... took out the Enterprise for a bit. But she didn't sink. So while she's getting repaired, she'll be fine. Plus, they still had Wasp. So in the end, it's basically a half-half. But with Fletcher on the top side, because he did sink a carrier. He did sink a flat top. It just so happened that flat top was a light carrier.
Success. Total losses for the Battle of Eastern Solomons were the following. For the Japanese, the light carrier Rujo was lost, as well as a transport and a destroyer. In addition, heavy damage was dealt to 2 more ships. They also lost 64 carrier aircraft, but the most damaging aspect of all were the 61 experienced aircrew with it.
Yeah, and that's the sad fact about Japan's air crews. They preferred experienced pilots compared to quality. They prefer quality versus quantity. And I've got to use the bathroom. So pause here, and I'll be back soon. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Be back.
A few minutes later.
Back. Oh, okay. Let's finish. How much longer we got left? 6 minutes. Yeah, I can handle that. This is like seriously. I think at this point in time, yeah, do it.
This was yet another batch of the finite elite airmen that the IJN had relied upon since the start of the war being permanently removed from the roster. And for the Americans, the price for their victory was light. Just heavy damage to the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Which required her to go to Pearl Harbor for repairs.
Yeah.
This excluded her from participating in the Guadalcanal campaign for many weeks.
And while she was at Pearl Harbor, she did get some upgrades. They removed all but one set of Chicago piano guns, the 1.1 inchers, and replaced them with 40mm Bofors. This will pay dividends for her later down her line. They also gave her, I think, some more 20mm Oerlikons anti-aircraft guns. And, they made her a bit more tougher.
16 carrier planes were lost, and 7 airmen were killed. Henderson Field had been saved from any immediate enemy threat and would live to fight another day. It had been an unquestionable American victory.
Yeah. Conclusion.
So, what became of Admiral Fletcher?
Ooh.
Unfortunately for him, history was not kind. As expected, many were not happy with Fletcher's performance in the Battle of Eastern Solomons. Then, a few days later, Fletcher was embroiled in yet another controversy. He found himself in a disturbingly similar situation, guarding convoys heading towards Guadalcanal. Between August 26th and August 31st, Fletcher was ordered to operate in another holding pattern southeast of Cactus. Lingering in a confined area and for such an extended amount of time would invariably draw unwanted attention, as he had always feared. On August 31st, disaster struck. Submarine I-26 spotted the Saratoga and unleashed a deadly salvo of 6 torpedoes. One of them found their mark and heavily damaged the Saratoga. The carrier would survive, but would be unavailable for the next 3 months. Her services would surely be missed, as the Guadalcanal campaign had barely begun.
Yeah.
This was the last controversy Fletcher's career could stand. The Guadalcanal campaign had truly tarnished his record. To begin with, he pulled out early during the invasion. Then, between August 11th and the 20th, he failed to prevent the enemy from landing troops on the island and conducting raids, not to mention that first attempt to retake the airfield at the Battle of the Tenarue. He won at Eastren Solomons, but many thought he failed to follow through, and now he gets a precious carrier torpedoed. In retrospect, we can see that many of these actions have their defensible reasons. But the top brass didn't think so. To their eyes, at this moment, they needed an aggressive, bold commander, and Fletcher was not it. And so while yes, I would agree that Fletcher was a cautious commander, just look at the irony. He's now either won or survived relatively intact every engagement with the enemy. And this is the Japanese Navy in 1942, at the pinnacle of their strength. The man should be applauded for just this achievement alone.
Yeah. Yeah, Fletcher should be applauded for that, because let's face it, the Japanese at the pinnacle of their strength were a force. And there's no mistake that they would have been defeated. If they were defeated at Midway, they would have been defeated probably in 1949 or 1950. But at that point in time, they were close to unbeatable. The Americans just didn't have it until the Battle of Midway. So Fletcher, for all his faults, he had a decisive victory, a strategic victory, and a victory. While the other commanders had raid successes on raids, and that was it. Even Halsey, when he was a commander of the Enterprises group, when he was the Admiral Enterprise, all he managed to do was do raids before he was struck down with a fever. So I think I know what's going to happen next.
In my opinion, Fletcher didn't get the credit he deserved. Anyways, as it was, Fletcher was already due for a rest period in the States. He made his way back home on board the wounded Saratoga, but Admiral King saw to it that he would never get a combat command in the South Pacific again. Instead, Fletcher served the rest of the war in the relatively quiet North Pacific. He died in 1973. The Battle of Eastren Solomons exemplifies how confusing carrier battles were in 1942. Author John Lundstrom, who in the past decades has done a lot to bring a positive light to Fletcher's war record, wrote, "History has come down hard against Frank Jack Fletcher's competence as a carrier leader. But once his decisions are studied in light of what he himself knew at the time, a far different picture emerges."
Yeah.
And I hope I was able to show you that by placing you in his shoes in the first chaotic hours of August 24th.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, well, I'll be aggressive for the first option. I can understand why he picked the second one, because if he didn't know where those two other carriers were, as we clearly saw what happened, you're relieving your aircraft carrier group vulnerable for attack anywhere. So he had reasons. Although I think Ernest King was a dick. Honestly, I don't know who King's personal story, because I haven't studied him. But Fletcher, in my opinion, was given this bad rep because of him. Because of King. King was going, you should have been more aggressive. But at the end of the day, he gave you a victory, King. And carriers are a lot more important than victories. And also, it was a submarine that struck the Saratoga, okay? A submarine got close enough to do that. Any competent commander, even Halsey, would have been cut dead at that point in time. Let's put it that way.
In my opinion, Fletcher performed as well as anyone could have, given the situation. So I'm going to end the video here, and I'm sure for many of you, this leaves you dissatisfied since you probably have some burning questions that need to be answered, such as, Why was American intelligence so poor prior to the battle? What was the Japanese battle plan during all of this? Many believed the Rujo was used as bait to get the Americans to send their strike in the wrong direction. Was this the actual case? And most mysteriously, why didn't the second airstrike find the Enterprise? And lastly, why did the Japanese withdraw from the battle on the 24th and let the convoy continue on without any air cover?
I'm gonna say this or not, I'm gonna be interested to see the justification for that. Because even with 2 carriers and they lost all their aircraft, you still had 68% of your aircraft losses. You still had a very good force that you could send over to protect that convoy. I mean, hell, you even have that service fleet that could come in to escort it. And the Canada's Air Force was pretty damn minor. So I'm gonna be very interested to see how.
Well, surely these
what their justification are in the second part 2 of this series, which is the Battle of the Eastren Solomons. You know, these ones. At their point of view, because it's gonna be very interesting for me to see their justification.
must be answered. And if you are feeling disappointed and confused that I didn't, well, it's intentional. Because this is how battles were fought. You'd fight with your enemy and be left with so many unanswered questions. It was only years later, when the war was over, you could finally see your adversary's battle reports, and then you could get a clearer picture. So, if you would like answers to those questions, then I encourage you to see part 2 of this series, which can be seen as the post-battle report. There, I answer all these questions by retelling the battle briefly again from the Japanese perspective, and then add some analysis at the end as well. But to be honest, this could be a standalone video. Most of you could probably figure out or correctly guess what was going on the other side. But like I said, if you're curious for more details, then I'll see you there in part 2.
We don't need that. Okay, so that'll be the next reaction video that we do. And dear God, this is over an hour video. Holy! So, I think I shall end it here. Let's go to the major screen here. So, I am DM Travel Typhoon. If you like this series of me reacting to stuff, please go to the guy, go to Monty Mayer's channel, watch his actual videos for yourselves, support the guy for his amazing work, and I hope we have all learned some stuff about history. Because history, if we fail to learn it, we're destined to repeat the exact same mistakes as they have. I mean, hell, just look at the pandemic we had recently. We failed to learn mistakes from the Spanish flu. Only, we also may have over-exaggerated all of our responses. Anyways, this is the end of this reaction. So, this is DM Travel Typhoon. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Ring that bell notification for any more videos that might be popping up soon. And I'll see you all later. TTFN, ta-ta for now. Peace.